Hello! It is spooky season. This year, my husband and I are gonna go out and take my niece and nephew out trick-or-treating, so I need a costume. I have been trying lately to make my Halloween costumes to be more versatile so that I can wear it outside of Halloween as well. This year, I'm just gonna be a simple witch. This is my plan. This hat that I made following Bernadette Banner's hat tutorial, which I will link below. It's a very nice witch hat based on Sherlock Holmes because it has these things. So you can wear it behind your head or under your chin. And I'm most likely going to wear it under my chin because in Canada, Halloween is in winter, basically. And I hate being cold, so this will keep my ears warm. This hat is very cute and warm. I made it out of a bamboo sheet I had, and then I used cotton wadding on the inside. That's my hat. For the actual costume, I'm going to be making a wrap dress. The Modus wrap dress by Trauma Studio. I said I was going to make this in my first YouTube video and I never actually made it, but this time I'm going to make it. I'm excited to make it because the way that they do the wrap is very nice on this dress. I think it's going to be very pretty. The problem with this dress is Halloween takes place in winter in Canada, and I need sleeves. This dress pattern does not have sleeves. To rectify that, I have this sleeve pattern that I downloaded from Rosary Apparel. I will link it below. It is a free sleeve pattern, and it's ginormous. I think what I want to do is I want to have bell sleeves, so I'm probably going to draw a straight line here along the pattern and then gather it into the cuff or pleat it into the cuff, as well as pleating it at the shoulder. I'm not sure how much fabric I have, so I will cut out the sleeves last and that will decide what kind of sleeve I will do, I suppose. The fabric that I got is this black bed sheet that I got at the thrift store. I believe it was $4.50. It's 100% cotton. I don't know what size it is. It's at least a double. Hopefully there is enough fabric here to make a wrap dress out of. I also wanted to make a hood. I was going to use this hood that I made a couple years ago when I was a Viking. It's functional, I suppose, but I don't really like the shape of it. When I made this, I was limited by the fabric I was using. This red was a couple of napkins that I sewed together, and this blue I had a very small cut of. And so it's not very full around my shoulders, and in fact it's kind of tight around my shoulders. So I'm going to draft a new hood pattern, but it is probably going to be just about this length, maybe just down to my elbows. The reason I wanted to use this one is because this blue fabric I'm pretty sure is a wool, and then this red is a cotton. And so that would be very warm. For the exterior, I got this really shiny fabric from the thrift store. I got 8 meters of it for $16, so it's like $2 a meter. My husband's going to use some of this too. He's going to be a wizard, but I'm going to use this for the exterior of my cape. I think for my cape, cloak, hood thing, I want to have a decorative clasp. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for that yet, so to be determined. Other props I was thinking of adding is I thought it would be cute to wear a broom as like a bag, because that's like your mode of transportation, right? I'm not sure if I'll do that. That also doesn't seem very practical because brooms have very thin handles. So that is also to be determined. For a wand, I'm not sure if I'm gonna make like an actually decorative wand because I only have so much time. I'll probably just use a chopstick. And that is my plan, so let's see how I go. Finished cutting out all of the pattern pieces. I didn't have enough fabric to cut out the lining because I was gonna do the lined versions. There's two versions, the lined version or the facing version. The facing pieces aren't very big. I didn't even have enough fabric to cut out the facing pieces. I'm going to use all of these scrappy bits and cut them up into bias tape, and that's how I'll bind the neckline, because I don't need to worry about the armholes because I've cut out sleeves. For the sleeves, I couldn't do the biggest version that Rosary Apparel has. She has 3 sleeve patterns in that sleeve template, and I did sleeve number 2, I believe, which is a bit narrower at the top, but then I flared it out at the wrist so that I can do that pleating that I want to do. I don't know if it'll gather in the arm side. Hopefully it's big enough for the arm side. We'll see, I guess. So now enjoy a time lapse of me cutting all of this scrap fabric into bias binding. Finished cutting all the bias binding. Now for an adventure, because I'm gonna try and use a machine that I just got at a yard sale for $20. It seems to be in good working order. It's a white 2468, which is apparently equivalent to an Algan 2468. The only problems I've been having with it is tension, but if I just use the right needle, the tension issues should sort itself out. So hopefully that is true. So I'm gonna set that up now. Now that I've got my machine running, I'm gonna sew all these together. The last steps of making the bias binding I'm going to do off camera, and that includes cutting the thread between each section, cutting off the extra fabric, ironing open every seam, and then rolling it into a bundle. It's later, the same day. I just finished all the binding. I also folded it in half because that's my preferred way for binding to work. After making all of this, I decided that I am being silly because I'm making this dress for winter. I should line it. So I went through my stash and I couldn't find any suitable fabrics. All my fabrics are lighter. I don't really have any dark fabrics that would work well for lining this. But then I saw the cape that I made for my husband when we dressed as Vikings a couple years ago. And the lining of that is a thin black cotton, which is perfect. So I'm gonna take that apart, use that black cotton to cut the lining. I probably won't be working on this very much more today, but I am gonna put the sleeves together. I'm just gonna sew the side seam or the underarm seam with a French seam, and then gather the cuff into a cuff that I still have to cut. I'm just gonna notch the center of the top of the sleeve and the cuff. And now I'm gonna iron my sleeves, which I should have done earlier. I'm gonna sew down here, I'm gonna trim it, then I'm gonna iron it open, then I'm going to sew it from the other side. It's a couple days later. It's now October. I'm feeling distinctly unmotivated, but I have a lack of time coming up. I'm pretty busy for this whole month. I have today off, so let's see how much I can get done today. I hope to finish the dress. That might be ambitious. Let's see how I go. Off camera, the last time that I talked to you, I talked about how I was going to make cuffs. I made the cuffs. They're maybe a little small, but I'm pretty sure they'll fit where I want them to fit. I hope they'll fit where I want them to fit. What I did was I just cut a rectangle that fit the thickest part of my arm here, and then I sewed that seam, pressed that seam open, and pressed up a lip of seam allowance here. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pleat the sleeve cuff, the sleeve hem into the cuff, then sew it all together. I'm gonna notch the opposite end of the cuff to the seam so that I know where halfway is for both of these, which will make pleating easier. And then I'm gonna do the same on the sleeve. I'm gonna start by matching the notches. So I'm gonna make my pleats approximately 5/8 of an inch. Cool. I'm gonna sew this. That's gonna be 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then I'm gonna fold this to the inside, and I think I'm gonna stitch that down by hand. I finished the cuffs. I did the whip stitch on the inside to secure the seam allowance down. That's what the cuff looks like. The pleats are really pretty, I think. I have also marked out and pinned my bodice pieces. So I'm gonna sew in my darts, starting at the bottom, going to the top, and then tying a knot at the top of each dart. I've looked through the instructions of the wrap dress again, and it looks pretty straightforward, pretty simple. There's very few pattern pieces. It seems like it's going to work out pretty quickly. So far I've been following the pattern pretty well, like the instructions pretty well. Now I'm gonna veer away from the instructions because the next instruction is to sew along the armhole with right sides facing, and that's how you finish the armhole seam if you were not adding sleeves. But since I'm adding sleeves, I'm gonna finish my armholes with bias tape after I sew in the sleeve. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna sew the side seams. I'm gonna sew the lining and the exterior fabric separately, and then sew in the sleeve. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is a whole lot of cats in my space right now. I don't know why they want to be with me right now. They didn't want to be with me earlier today. So now I'm going to put this inside out. The sleeve, right side out. Stick that in. So I'll match the underarm seam with the side seam. Pushing the seam allowance towards the back. And I'll match the center top with the shoulder seam. So I'm going to pin my way up till about here, and then I'm going to pleat the rest of the fabric into that area. Okay. I have this much extra fabric, so that's as big as my pleat will be. But I want it to face this way so that it's a square on the top. So I'm going to do it like that. I've done a surprising amount since I've seen you last. It's been 3 hours. I finished sewing and seam binding the armholes with the bias tape that I made. I sewed the ties. This is the short tie. Then I started the waistband. According to the pattern reviews, this is the most confusing part of the pattern. I just did one step and then read the next line and then did the next step. Here you can see this is the outer fabric because it's been interfaced. I sewed this seam and then pressed it open. And then on this side, I marked 1/2 inch up on the top and then 1/2 inch down on the other side. So this I'm not supposed to sew. So I'm going to sew from the edge to this line and then from the edge to this line. And this stays open. That's a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then for the inner piece, we did the same thing but opposite. So this seam is sewed on the inner piece and then I pressed it open. And then this seam, it will match with this seam once they're right sides together. I think the confusing part is that it's the right side on the outer seam and the left side on the inner seam. So you're like, how are these going to go together? They're opposite sides. So I marked on this one also 1/2 inch up and 1/2 inch down. So that's going to be open. So I'm going to sew that now. Now they want us to sew a basting stitch on the seam allowance, just on these seams that have the gap, so that the seam allowance stays in place. I'm going to iron it first, just to make that easier for myself. So I've basted those seams. I've just sewn the strap to the outer waistband. I pinned the waistband right sides together with the bodice. On the inside, there was the inner waistband together with the right sides together. I'm going to sew first just straight along this seam because there's a lot going on. And then after, I'm going to do the side of the waistband like the pattern wants me to. The next step is to put the bodice aside and to start working on the skirt. the next day. Last night before I went to bed, I ironed the skirt pieces, and then I finished the fronts by folding at the 1/2 inch notch and ironed that flat, and then did the same with at the 1.5 inch notch. Then I sewed that in place. And I read in the pattern reviews that the pockets sit high, so I measured on myself where I want the pocket to sit by holding the skirt up to my waist, marking where my sweatpant pocket starts, because I feel like that's a good place for pockets to start. And I cut those notches into both the front pieces and the back pieces. I pinned the pocket piece to that side seam starting at that notch, sewed it in place, and then I serged down that whole side seam, pressed that flat because the serging made it a little wobbly because that seam is on the bias. Pressed the pocket to the outside and understitched it down, ironed that again. Then for the back, I did a French seam in the center back, and I added the pockets the same way as I did the front pieces. That's everything I did last night. Then this morning, I sewed those side seams and then serged around the pockets, which turned out really well. I was going to use bias tape for this, but I wasn't sure I'd have enough to do both the side seams and the hem. So I just did the side seams serging because I also didn't want it to be super bulky, and the serging is quite thin comparatively. I hemmed the bottom of a skirt using my preferred method of single fold bias tape on the right side of the fabric. And I pressed the folded edge of the bias tape towards the seam allowance and stitched that again as close to the fold as I could. I trimmed the seam allowance, I turned that up and sewed that down as well. I sewed gathering stitches along the top of the bodice in 4 different sections so that it would be easier to gather. I did the front section, half the back, and then half the back, and then the other front section. Did I say that I gathered the bodice? I gathered the skirt. I pinned that into place. I just pinned that to the exterior piece of the belt, the piece with the interfacing. I'm going to stitch that in place now. After I'm done stitching that in place, I'm going to fold it down and over the inner waistband and iron that all down. I'm going to stitch a rectangle around the whole waistband, and then the whole dress is done. And then we'll move on to the next part of this costume, which is the cape. And my plans for that have changed, so stay tuned. Hi, it's about a week after I last filmed. I have been working, so I haven't had as much time to sew. Here's a new plan for the cape. Instead of using that really decorative mesh fabric with gold details, I'm gonna save that to make a 1920s style dress in the future. I have this cotton panel bed sheet left over from when I made my niece and nephew Harry Potter robes for Christmas last year, and I'm going to use this for the cloak. I plan to do just a simple half circle cloak with a hood. I'm going to use the hood pattern I have from the boxwood hoodie, which is a free pattern from Mood, and I'm going to use the circle skirt calculator by Hand London. I will link those both below. I'm going to cut 2 layers out of this so that it's a double layered cloak so that it's extra warm. Sorry, I'm just thinking, I have this fabric that I got at the thrift store at the same time as I got the bed sheet for the wrap dress, and it's so pretty. I think this is called a shot fabric. Gold threads going one way and then blue threads going the other, so that when you move it, it shimmers with different lights, and you can't really tell if it's blue or gold. I love this fabric. It's plastic. I got about 3 meters from the thrift store for $7.99, which I don't think is bad. I plan to cut a whole lot of stars out of this and pin it or sew it onto the cloak so that it's very like vintage witch cloak. I got a star template from the internet. I will link where below. You can get different sizes. I am not good at drawing symmetrical stars, so I love the internet. It has everything you need. And my plan initially for this new plan was to do 2 layers of the flannel and then just have the stars on the outside. But now that I'm thinking about it, wouldn't it be pretty to have this peeking from the inside as a lining? If this fabric's wide enough to make a circle skirt out of. That's the length that I want. I want this to go to my hip. That's the length I want it to be. So that's everything cut. Now I'm gonna iron everything and then hang the cloak so that the bias can stretch. I've sewn the cloak part together down the center front on both sides. Then I wrapped it around my mannequin so that the bias can drop. I've sewn the hoods right sides together, both inner and outer, and now I'm going to sew them together along the base. This seam, this goes around my head like this, so I'm going to sew them right sides together along this. And then that's basically all I can do until the bias drops. I want to try and make this that there's no exposed seams. It'd be really cool to make this reversible. And then I can decide on the day whether I want to be a golden blue witch or just a sneaky black witch. All of those scraps you may have noticed that I had of the shiny fabric, I'm going to use those to cut out stars. I'm not sure if I'm going to use the stars, but my husband's being a wizard and he needs stars for his costume, so I can cut them out for him. Hi, it's about a week later. I had a mini crisis because I've been filming this video on a new camera and it films in like 5K, which I didn't realize. And when I put the footage on my computer, my editing software kept crashing because there's 71 gigabytes of footage so far, and so my computer couldn't handle it, and I wasn't sure if I would have to scrap this video. But then I did some research and it turns out that my editing software is just super old. Something called a codec was wrong. The editing software couldn't understand because the codec was a newer codec. That I downloaded an open source editing software called OpenShot, and that has been able to edit the footage no problem. So I don't need to scrap this video, and that's great. It's been about a week. I don't know if I said that already. The cape has been hanging that whole time. So let's trim that to size. So that's done, and it was a little bit more dangerous than I anticipated. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna sew along the bottom while the cape is inside with the, so it's like inside out right now. So I'm just gonna sew along the bottom with a straight stitch. I finished sewing that seam. What concerns me is it seemed like the flannel layer was stretching whenever I was sewing it. I don't have enough time to let it hang again now that it's sewn. I think I'm just going to go for it, turn it inside out. I don't know if I'm going to top stitch it, at least along the bottom. I'm probably going to top stitch it along the sides, but we'll see how it looks after I add the hood. I did not top stitch all the way around because I kind of like how this pooling looks on the bottom. I think it makes it look kind of like a mushroom or something, which is very witchy vibes. What I like about this peeking out from the underside is it's like Hufflepuff colors, because Hufflepuff colors are black and yellow, and I am a Hufflepuff according to the quiz on the Hogwarts website. Now you know. I'm going to attach the hood by first attaching the black side of the hood to the black side of this. And then I'm going to fold over and tuck in the seam allowance on the yellow side and maybe stitch that down by hand. Hopefully this will be done in the next half hour, and then I'll quickly bang out the wand, and I'm not going to do the broom. So sew that down. Okay, I am going to stitch this down by hand, and I just want to say quick, because my camera is running out of space, that for the wand, what I plan to do is I cut out 2 stars using that star template, and I'm going to sew around here, around all the edges, but leave a gap there, stuff it with some stuffing, and then stick a chopstick up the center and hold it in place with hot glue. And that's going to be my wand. Very simple. Hi, it's a couple days later. I finished the cape. I did hand stitching inside the hood, and I had thread that matched near perfectly, so it will be reversible. I also top stitched around the hood. I think it looks really good when it's on, because I top stitched the hood and this lining fabric is so stiff. It really holds its shape really well. For the closure, So I have this little pouch filled with my single buttons, and some of them are quite decorative, and so I need to choose one to use for my cloak. This one, which kind of reminds me of someone in Marvel films had a gauntlet and it had like infinity stones in it. That's what this reminds me of, because those stones are like almost the same colors as in the Infinity Gauntlet. I've had this button for a while. It's from my mother-in-law. I've inherited quite a few button collections over the years, and I'm actually working through them, so that's nice. This one is just a circle one that has a face on it. This one I got in a $5 grab bag. I used its mates, and this one's lonely. This one is really pretty. It's metal, and it has this nice teal lacquer part. And the symbol on the inside looks kind of magical too. I think of all of these, gosh darn, it's so hard to choose. I think I'm going to go with this one because the black and the inside goes with the black of the cape. Then I have some embroidery floss that I think I'm going to crochet and sew to one side in order to be the loop that the button loops around. I also got this far on my wand. I just did a simple basting stitch to hold the two pieces of star together. And then once I had basted it all together around, I burned the edges with my lighter so it wouldn't fray. And then I stuffed it with some scrap yarn. It's still open on the bottom, so I just have to stick a chopstick or something up there. And then the wand is done. Finishing touches, or final touches to the costume. I have this slip that I made a couple years ago from a pattern by Vera Venus. It's a bias slip dress. The construction isn't amazing, but this is what I'm planning to wear under the wrap dress. I used seam binding to finish the inner seams. I got this fabric at the thrift store. I don't know what kind of fabric it is, but it's very soft. I like to think it's silk, but it's not silk. It's probably some kind of plastic. And I didn't have any matching thread, and instead of going out to get matching thread, I just used blue thread. Because of course I would. I use blue for everything. And then I have compression stockings that are black and white striped, which is the classic witchy sock theme. So that's the process of making my Halloween costume. And the best part is it fits very nicely into this little tote here because I'm traveling with it. The only thing that doesn't fit is the basket, which I haven't mentioned previously, but this was hanging on my wall above my desk and I just thought this is a cute basket and witches carry baskets, so that's why I had that. Final thoughts. The cloak is excellent. It's very comfortable. It's very warm. I think that I'll be comfortable doing the trick-or-treating in October, so that's great. The hat, I don't love the shape of. I might look at it to see if I can finagle it a bit because I feel like it's just a little bit wrong, but I'm not sure what to do to make it right. The dress, the sleeves are a little tight, especially when I raise my arms. It's uncomfortable. You can tell that this dress was not drafted for sleeves. It's meant to be sleeveless. It's still pretty comfortable. I like the way that the wrap works, and I like the length of the straps. The slip worked out well. The socks, cute. The wand, adorable. 100% love this costume, and I will be wearing parts of it again. I'm pleased with my Halloween costume making. I hope you enjoyed the process, and I hope you have a happy Halloween. Bye!